Hi, I'm Tim Wiedrich, Section Chief for Health Resources and Response Section with the North Dakota Department of Health, and this is a statewide hospital operational briefing. Let's go ahead and begin by checking in with Tim Blazel and see if Tim has any opening comments from the North Dakota Hospital Association. Tim?
Yes, hi Tim. I just have one thing I'd like to update everybody on the call, and again, I'm not going to get into the details because there's going to be more information coming out to all of you. But we've had some discussions regarding what we, I guess, call a state transfer center. And what that would involve would be, again, this would be, I think, would benefit the critical access hospitals in the state. So again, when you're trying to get transfers into tertiary hospitals or your normal tertiary hospital, and they're dealing with bed capacity, and there's no beds for this patient that is in the critical access hospital arena, there would be another option for all of you. And so what we call it is a state transfer center. It's almost like a second call number. And so you'd call this number and then they would help you place that patient probably in another tertiary hospital within the state. That's the goal, to keep the patient in the state. So again, I know we've had some issues with transfers based on, the bigger hospitals having some bed capacity issues. So again, I'm not going to get into the details. You'll be getting more information about this. And this state sort of transfer center is going to be run and controlled. I guess I shouldn't say control, is maybe a bad word, but by Essentia Health. And so you'll be hearing from them. They are going to utilize some of their resources to get this up and running. So again, probably later in the week, probably early next week, they will be reaching out to all of you with more details. So bottom line, there will be a second number to call. Again, obviously the first number to call is your normal process with your normal tertiary. But again, if that hospital is, has no beds, you can utilize this second number to call. So again, we've had a lot of discussion about this. I know other states are doing it, so it's something we're going to implement here in North Dakota shortly. So again, you'll be getting more information later on. So Tim, I just wanted to update the group on that, and whether it's now or at the end, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Tim. And obviously a lot more information about that coming up in future programs and through other mechanisms that information will be provided. Well, let's have a quick nursing update. And as you know, we have brought in Department of Defense nurses in the past, and we've have a certain level of traveling nurses that have been brought in as well. And that effort is continuing. And so this past week, we had 39 additional nurses that have arrived within North Dakota so far. So it takes our count up to 136 that we have in-state at this point. As we continue to build, our goal is to get to, by next Wednesday, 260. That would be 60 Department of Defense nurses, and that would be 200 of the traveling nurses that have been brought in through that process. So this will continue on, obviously, for some time until we get the full cadre of individuals in. And then as they are arriving in and going through the orientation processes, there's an allocation process that happens as the nurses are being distributed between the tertiary care centers, critical access hospitals, and long-term care facilities. In terms of the activities, in addition to that, there are 75 nurses that the health department has that we have temporarily employed as part of our COVID response team that are full-time. And then we have a quantity of additional nurses that are working part-time as part of that response effort as well. So between the Department of Defense, the nurses that have been brought in through the various traveling entities, and then the nurses that we've hired full-time on a temporary basis and part-time on a temporary basis, that is what's making up the response team that's supplementing the existing medical personnel within the state. And of course, a number of the hospitals themselves have also brought in additional traveling resources that they've procured during their normal channels. So we'll keep moving forward and hopefully continuing to build additional capacity within the system through that process. Well, most programs, we try to bring you another resource that would be identified as useful during a surge process for hospitals. And so for today, we're going to be having some conversation about ambulance buses. And if we ended up doing a larger movement of patients inter-facility, that these are the types of assets that could be utilized for that process. And so let me turn now to Ellen Orhus, who will provide us with some information about the ambulance buses. Ellen?
Thanks, Tim. So, Clint, if you can pull up the slides. There we go. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Today, we're going to talk about patient transportation assets, specifically ambuses and bus kits. Next slide. Before I do that, we'll talk just a little bit about what we do in terms of who goes when. And I think it's generally accepted. And I know we encourage folks to, if you have high acuity patients, like patients in ICUs, that kind of thing, to use an ambulance. And for the moderate or lower acuity patients, we would use our ambuses. Next slide. So, and then if you could hit it again there, Clint, and there we go. So we have two ambuses right now, one in Fargo, one in Bismarck. Each one has a capacity of 18 patients. The buses are designed for advanced life support capabilities. The Bismarck bus is maintained by Metro Area Ambulance Service and provides personnel. They provide personnel also when the bus is deployed. The same thing with the Fargo bus that is maintained by FM Ambulance, and they also provide personnel when the bus is deployed. Next slide. The AMBUS has a staffing of 3 to 7 providers, depending upon missions, and the staffing includes EMTs, paramedics, and a CDL driver. What you see next is one of 6 of our stretcher buses, or 6 of our buses that we have in our fleet. And what we're going to talk about with this is specifically the stretcher buses, because we also have wheelchair kits in our medical cache. Medical cache currently has 6 stretcher kits, and depending upon obviously the bus size and the configuration, can hold anywhere from 6 to 18 patients. All buses are designed for advanced life support. And we have contracts with companies currently, Valley Bus in Fargo and Dietrich in Jamestown, for the rental of buses and drivers. And what they will do is basically rent us a bus and a driver, and they will pull seats out, install one of our kits, and then after the missions are completed, they will pull the kits out, put the seats back in, and put the bus back into production. Next slide. This is a picture of one of the sections of a stretcher bus. As you can see, it holds 6 stretchers, and with the very larger bus, we can get 3 sets of these in here to comprise the 18 patients. Each bus comes with a pillow and a blanket, and it's also got restraints, just like an ambulance cot, so the patient doesn't fall out. An ambulance cot is provided with each bus, and that's to assist with loading and unloading. And of course, they're set up for advanced life support. Next slide. So this is one of the medical supply units that goes with the ambulance bus. There's durable assessment equipment in the bus. So obviously, blood pressure, or be able to take vital signs and blood sugars, that kind of thing. There's basic and advanced airway management equipment and supplies, and obviously oxygen, both a main bottle and a backup. There's wound treatment supplies in there, IV supplies and solutions, defibrillator monitor, and cardiac or crash cart drugs, as we like to call them, first-line cardiac drugs. Next slide. So this actually shows a different configuration, and that's the nice thing about these buses. If you'll see in the front there, this bus is configured with 6 stretchers and then wheelchairs. So you can haul a combination of the two. It could be 12 stretchers, and then the rest wheelchairs. Could be all stretchers. So it's very good that way. And it doesn't take long to switch these around either. So we're pretty fluid with these things. Next slide. The stretcher bus staff come from the Medical Reserve Corps. There are, if there was a smaller event or something like that, we may handle that with Corps staff. But for larger events, we asked folks from the Medical Reserve Corps to come in. You usually get a driver. Well, you will get a driver with a CDL that also has a passenger endorsement. 2 to 3 nursing staff or EMS personnel that will act as staff for the bus. And then we always have the facility staff, both at the receiving facility, the departing facility and the receiving facility assist with loading. Next slide. So when it comes to that, we have just-in-time training for both the Medical Reserve Corps staff and for the staff of the hospital or the facility that we're moving from and to. I will tell you that a few years ago, we assisted the Dickinson Hospital with the move from their old hospital to their new one, and it was a great exercise for us to be able to exercise with in real time the movement of patients with the stretcher bus. The just-in-time training that we did for the Dickinson folks took about 15 minutes, so it does not take very long to do the just-in-time training at all. We also, in a typical year, this not being one obviously, we have numerous exercises across the state, throughout the year, and these also qualify for CMS. So we try to provide a number of training opportunities for facilities across the state. So next slide. And that's the end. I know that's kind of short and sweet, but at the end of the program, I'll be here for any questions if you have any. And for more information, just get a hold of us, 328-2270, or our operations center at 328-0707. Back to you, Tim.
Thank you, Alan. And again, we're not indicating that there's a need for these buses at this point. I know that some states have been requesting some additional ambulances to be brought in from outside resources because of some of the difficulties that some states are having in securing adequate transportation. We're not at that level, but we wanted to make sure that you're aware that these assets do exist. The 6 that Alan talked about that are within our fleet, within the health department fleet, are permanently configured to do this. There are the 2 additional buses that were purpose-made, manufactured for that purpose that he mentioned in both Fargo and Bismarck. And then in terms of the contract with bus companies, we have enough kits for 16 additional buses beyond that. So just gives you a rough idea about the quantity and the capacity of that system. If you have questions, as Alan said, he'll be available when we get to the hospital rounds. Let's check in now with the VP3 team and see if Roseanne, Jan, or Seth have any additional information that they would like to share with us. Folks? Well, we may not have anyone on from the VP3 team today. And so with that being the case, let's go ahead and move on into the rounds across the state for the hospital rounds. And Ryan, I'd like you to go ahead and start the slides so that we can start to collect the information that we traditionally collect during this time period. And again, as I call out the 8 major cities within the state, the 8 largest cities, if your hospital is closest to the one that I'm calling out, please share with us any information that you may have that may be dealing with any difficulty, or if you want to have a conversation with your peers and raise whatever topics you may have, but just to kind of give us a status report in addition to collecting the information by responding to the slides that are appearing on the screen. So with that, let's go ahead and get started in the Fargo area and see if there are any questions or comments from the Fargo area. All right, not hearing any in that area. What about the Jamestown area? Let's try the Bismarck area. And let's move up to the Williston area. And now we're over at the Minot area. And now the Devil's Lake area. And finally the Grand Forks area.
It's easy to take the grant tour. Take the tour online or make an appointment to see it in person.
So I do hear an open microphone. I don't know if someone is interested in making a comment or has a question. All right.
Tim, this is Alan. Did you grab the Dickinson area?
I thought that I did, but if I missed them, let's go back to Dickinson. Well, let me just quickly share with you something, since we obviously have some time today before we close out. And I do want to kind of give you a heads up. One of the luxuries that we had coming into this, if you can call it a luxury, is the fact that we had a significant supply of N95 respirators and other PPE through the state medical cache. Unfortunately, as times move forward, we've not been able to obtain large quantities of some of those supplies. Many of them we have been able to restore at this point, but one of the areas that we're concerned about are the N95 respirators. And we have a target of 400,000 that we had established as a threshold to begin doing some specific conservation measures. We started back in April with 1.4 million before we got into the COVID event. And we've now dipped below the 400,000 mark with what we have within the state medical cache for our N95 respirators. We've been trying since the beginning of this emergency back in April to restore significant quantities of the N95 respirators. And while we've gotten some quantities back in, it's certainly been nowhere near the rate that we have consumed. And so as we're now at this juncture, and the types of N95 respirators that have been by far the majority of what's within our state medical cache, and so by far what we've fit tested to across the state, which is what controlled what we put in the state medical cache, are 3M products, primarily the 1860s and 1860Ss. And with now less than 400,000 of those types of respirators, and the fact that the vast majority of the state's public health and medical professionals have been fit tested to that, we've been reluctant to order other types of N95 respirators into the cache because of the fit testing issue. But since we've now dipped below the 400,000, and our conversations so far that we've had with 3M has indicated that it's likely that we will not be able to get significant quantities of the 1860s until next October. We're now at a junction or a juncture where we need to basically take some significant steps to add additional product into the warehouse and to notify you that this step will be taken in the very near future and will likely have to cause fit testing to occur in order to accommodate the new respirators that we are in fact able to obtain. At the early process of this emergency, the federal government did acquire in an airlift process a number of N95 respirators that were brought in from China, and those are KN95 respirators. And so there throughout the country have been a number of KN95 respirators that have begun to be used by people across the country. And what we're attempting to do is we are acquiring some KN95 respirators, but we're really not intending those at this point to be used for medical providers, but rather because right now the KN95s are only acceptable as part of an emergency use authorization for medical for the COVID emergency. And there's some other minor differences with KN specifications over our normal N95 that we use in this country. But it's appearing that we're able to obtain some significant quantities of 1870 plus, which is manufactured by 3M. And so we are expecting significant quantities of those to begin to be delivered at the end of December, at the end of this month. And so as part of that process, we recognize that it's going to create additional effort in order to complete the fit testing against this new 1870 model. But we really have no alternative in that we've been trying very hard to obtain the normal 1860s and 1860Ss, and they just are not available. So there will be more information coming about this once we actually have the 1870 pluses. We'll begin to do a distribution to the hospitals and the medical systems and the public health systems so that you can begin thinking about how you're going to be able to accommodate the fit testing for this new mask. And obviously it's our hope that we'll be able to later on restore back to the 1860s and 1860Ss. But at this point, given where our supply is at and the consumption that's occurring, it appears that we have no alternative but to take the steps to go through the fit testing and acquire this other mask. So let me stop there, and there'll be a lot more information coming about this in the future, but let me stop there and see if anybody has any questions or comments about that. All right, well, I'm not hearing any, and so with that, we'll go ahead and close out today's meeting as we will be meeting again next Friday. Remember, that's on Fridays when we do the intelligence update, so we'll expect to have Grace at that point and see where our numbers are aligning for this week and where the hospital levels are and the levels of positive cases. So take care, and we'll have a chance to visit again next Friday at 2.